Today's episode is a heavy one. It's about the question that lingers in the back of your mind when the world feels overwhelming, when nothing really makes sense, or when you're sitting alone at night wondering about the point of it all. Why do we exist? My name is Amal, and this is episode 2 of Not Your Sheikh. I know I'm not the only one who's wrestled with this question. I think it hits people at different points in their life. Maybe when you're faced with loss, when you've witnessed injustice, or even when you're just, you start thinking a little too deeply. For me, it wasn't just a passing thought. It was something that really started to consume me and it wouldn't let me rest. And honestly, it's still something I struggle with a little. But I want to take you through a conversation I had with a Sheikh because what he said shifted something in me. And it didn't make all my questions disappear, but it gave me a framework, something to hold on to when the thoughts start spiraling and so on. So let me take you back to the moment. I was attending a lecture and the Sheikh was talking about Islam in the modern world, where he explored some of the most pressing questions that Muslims face in today's world. And he talked about how Islamic teachings can provide clarity and direction and so on. And in one of the segments or the topics he was talking about, he was talking about the reasoning behind religion. So not about existence itself, but about why we need religion to go on about our business in this world. And he was explaining that religion isn't just about rules or rituals, and it's really about understanding our place in the world, about anchoring ourselves in something greater than the chaos around us. But as he was speaking, and mind you, this was like a classroom setting, so there wasn't many of us in the room, but I was at the back, holding in my breath so that people around me can't see or hear that I'm struggling to be quiet while the tears are streaming down my face like an actual river. It wasn't just tears in my eyes, guys. I was literally struggling not to scream cry. That type of crying. It was so embarrassing. I literally had to leave the room because people started noticing and they were handing me tissues and asking if I was okay and so on. And it wasn't just sadness, it was really frustration, confusion, and a kind of deep aching and exhaustion because I've been carrying these thoughts alone for so long. So after I calmed down, I went back to the room and I thought I had my crying out of my system, so I won't be embarrassing myself anymore when I raised my hand. But my voice betrayed me and I asked in a shaky voice, I understand what you're saying about why we need religion, but my question is about the step that comes before it. So why do we even exist in the first place? Why did Allah create us and this world and this trial, knowing that we would suffer, that we would struggle, that so many people would be tested in ways that feel unbearable? If Allah is all-knowing and so powerful, then He knew from the very beginning how everything would play out. He knew that some people would end up in heaven, some in hell. So why go through with it? And why even start this cycle in the first place? Even when He was creating the prophets and going back to the very first step of creating Prophet Adam, why? And I continued by like giving context and talking about my survivor's guilt, about how I look at what's happening to others around the world, and I feel so disgusted with myself and my privileges because I have it better than them. And although I'm so blessed and thankful to Allah that He has always protected me, I can't help but wonder why others are going through hardships that I can't even bear the thought of. And the Sheikh's answer could be divided into two parts. Firstly, he addressed the part where I was talking about the direction my thoughts take me when I see what is happening to others around me and like around the world. And honestly, his answer could not have been more perfect for me personally, because it really felt like he's describing me and talking about me specifically. Although I don't know this Sheikh and he doesn't know me, it was the first time we see each other, and so he doesn't know my personality or my struggles or anything. And yet the answer was so personal to the point that when he was done, my friend turned around and she was hearing him speak, her only thought was about how perfect this answer is, because it was as if he was describing me. And so you're probably going like, okay, tell us what he said. And so I'm going to be paraphrasing, but keep in mind the way he said it was probably more poetic and amazing to the ear. But I'm going to be paraphrasing, so apologies for that. He said some people are tested through obvious hardships like poverty, war, oppression, and so on. But for others, their test is more internal. The trials that Allah sends us are personal and they take up multiple forms. And that could be your emotions. And that hit me really hard because putting it that way, it really opened my eyes on how much Allah would know a servant, and Allah knows how much each person can bear. He put something inside me that is in a higher dose than he put it in others, and that is my sensitivity, my empathy, and the way I feel my emotions. Allah knows I'm one of the weak soldiers and that I probably wouldn't be able to handle more than controlling my emotions, at least in this part of my life, like this phase. And of course, like the older I get, the more hardships will come. But for right now, I totally agree with what the Sheikh was saying when he said that controlling my emotions is my trial for right now. Because some people can see suffering and process it without breaking down. But for me, I carry it with me, and like I mentioned this in my previous episode, where I can't just see something tragic and then continue about my day smoothly. It follows me and it eats away at me. And the Sheikh was saying that this in itself was a test. And I fully believe that Allah tests people in different ways. For me, the test is how I handle the weight of knowing. And the Sheikh was elaborating on his point of how emotions can be a trial. So he put it in a way, I can't remember the exact words, but questions like, can you channel it into something meaningful? Can you learn to regulate it so it doesn't consume you? Will your emotions lead you away from or to God? And that was exactly what was happening to me, because my emotions became so overwhelming that they started to paralyze me. And like Shaitan was whispering, what's the point? And all, like, I'll sadly admit that unfortunately I did really reach a very low point with thoughts like that, which really stem from Shaitan, because I know myself and I know that these thoughts and questions that were coming up would have never come from Amal. So that was the first moment where I realized that maybe my emotions weren't just a burden, and maybe they were meant to be this way, because maybe my deep sensitivity wasn't a flaw, but a responsibility sent from God. And that leads us to the next part of the answer that the Sheikh was giving me, and that's of existence itself. The Sheikh started by saying something so simple yet so profound, and it was like, Allah does not owe us an explanation. At first, I didn't know how to take that, but then he expanded on it, and he was saying like, Allah is the creator. He could have chosen not to create anything at all, and we would never have known the difference. But the fact that he did create us means that he wanted to give us something, and not just anything, but the greatest possible gift, and that is the chance to earn eternal nearness to him. And this makes me think of an analogy that I hope can be beneficial to you guys. So imagine a king who has unlimited treasures. He could keep them locked away untouched and no one would ever know about them, but instead he decided to share them, not randomly, but in a way where people earn them, like where those who strive for them appreciate their worth. And now imagine that times infinity, because the treasure we're talking about is heaven. The Sheikh explained about how Allah could have created us without free will, like the angels, so we wouldn't know anything but worshipping him and we can't do no wrong and so on. But instead, he gave us the ability to choose, to struggle, to strive, to overcome. And in return, Allah has promised us a reward that will make every hardship seem like a fleeting moment. And this really hit me hard to hear him say that we go to heaven, like when we go to heaven, inshallah, we're going to be very thankful for the hardships that got us there. And like the more hardships we face, the higher the ranking we're going to be put in. That will actually start wishing we undergone more hardships, because now we know what we know, like when we reach heaven. So that was something I had heard before, but never in a way that truly clicked until that moment. And the answer honestly made me happy, and I hope it works for you as it did me. If you needed more reasoning, I wanted to remind you about how in the Quran, Allah tells us that before we were even created in this world, our souls already testified to his existence. We made a covenant with him, one that we don't remember now, but one that still binds us. So this means that before we were even born, before we experienced this world, we already knew the truth, and that this life isn't just random. It's part of a journey that our souls began long before we entered this world. And so at this point, you might still have the question, but why create people who would suffer? Why create people who would go to hell? And when I was looking into this topic, I can say what resonated with me and how I understand it now. If I'm saying something wrong, then remember that this is not your Sheikha, so I'm not your Sheikha. But anyway, Allah didn't create people for the purpose of sending them to hell. He created people with free will, and some choose to reject him, but he has also promised infinite mercy. And he always tells us, the doors of repentance are always open, and he has given us countless ways to return to him. We just need to remind ourselves that even the smallest good deed, something as simple as removing harm from someone's way or someone's path in this life, this can tip the scales in our favor. And what I find really interesting in that regard is, regardless of where people stand on religion, we all seem to struggle with the same questions, because even those who don't necessarily believe in God or an ultimate purpose still find themselves searching for meaning. It's like we're wired to look for something greater, even when we don't know what that something is. And I've always wondered, why is that? And in life, if life was just a random accident, if there was no deeper reason for our existence, why do we instinctively feel like there should be one? Why do humans crave meaning so deeply that even when we don't find it in faith, we try to construct it in other ways through careers, relationships, personal achievements, and so on? And I think about how people say life has no inherent meaning, so we just create our own. And sure, in a way we can choose what's important to us, what gives us purpose. But when you really sit with that idea, doesn't it feel a little incomplete? Because if meaning is something we just invent, then that means it can also disappear. If someone builds their entire purpose around their job, what happens when they lose it? Or if someone finds meaning in a relationship, what happens if that relationship ends? And so, if meaning is purely subjective, does it really hold any weight at all? I also think there's this assumption that rejecting the idea of a greater purpose makes life easier, that if you stop searching for meaning, you can just live freely without the burden of having to justify your existence. But from what I've seen, it doesn't really work that way, because even when people claim that life has no inherent purpose, they don't actually live like that, because we're not built to. When people feel like their lives lack some meaning or purpose, it's usually not a freeing experience. It's a crisis, a deep, unsettling feeling of emptiness. And if meaning is just something we make up, then why does the lack of it feel so unbearable? I don't know. I think that feeling is there for a reason, that maybe our search for meaning isn't a glitch in the system, but proof that we were created with intention, that we do have a purpose and our souls know it, even when our minds struggle to grasp that. And because that feeling, the one that keeps us up at night, the one that whispers there's something more, I don't think that's just random. I think that's the answer we've been looking for all along, but the worldly pleasures distract us from that. But at the end of the day, this topic is greater than you and me, and I still don't have all the answers and might never have them. But this conversation gave me something more than just answers. It gave me perspective. Maybe my emotions are my test and trial in this life. For now, maybe my struggles, my questions, my guilt, all of it serves a purpose. And maybe, just maybe, when we finally see the bigger picture, inshallah, everything will make sense. So if you've ever felt the weight of knowing, if you've ever questioned why, know that you're not alone, but also know that we weren't created without reason. Our existence matters, and one day we'll understand why. But until then, my advice is to really hold on to faith and remember Allah never burdens a soul beyond what it can bear. But yeah, that's my take. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode, inshallah. Bye.